Let me ask some question about the Israel and its territorial expansion. There is some analysts that believe uh, Israel ambitions are a matter of self-defense, so they are trying to protect themselves from future attack. It's a practice of self-defense. But there are also some argument that believe these are not self-defense actions, but it's a matter of territorial expansion. So, from a structural perspective, how should we evaluate whether such policies represent imperial tendencies or a different category of political formations?
Yeah, it's a tough question because we're dealing also with a complicated domestic Israeli situation where there's a very large section of, you know, eschatological, political people who believe that the Bible and Genesis in particular gives the Jewish people the right to the land between the Euphrates and the Nile. Yeah, that's there in Genesis. And that's a very powerful section of the Israeli political class. But I don't think they are also actually going to go and take over Iraq and Jordan and Syria. I don't think they are that crazy right now. Yeah. Um, I think it's a combination of what you might call the security ambition. It's a combination of that and a combination of certainly this wider idea that God gave the Jewish people all this land. It's a combination. Look, the security thing is crazy because if Israeli troops go up to the Litani River in Jordan or even go beyond the Litani River, wherever you go will be a new borderline with new confrontations because now you've got millions of people who've been displaced, and within the so-called security zone you'll have very angry people living there, who don't want to live under Israeli occupation. You're going to have the revitalization of Hezbollah. When did Hezbollah become really powerful? During the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. That's when Hezbollah really trained and filled its ranks with people and so on. Hezbollah has been somewhat weakened. But if you go and conquer South Lebanon, you are going to revive Hezbollah. So the security argument by itself makes no sense. History has shown us the best security between two countries is to have an agreement. That's the best security. Between two countries, have an agreement. If you don't have an agreement, it's difficult to have security. Yeah, you can't have security by muscle alone because people are going to fight back. Yeah, you crush the Palestinians. I had a debate with a Israeli where I said to the Israeli who was an ex-military person that your military is completely useless. And the moderator asked me, why did you say that? And I said, because you can't even conduct a proper genocide. You're supposed to kill and remove 2.3 million Palestinians from Gaza. You can't do that because it's actually impossible. It's impossible to kill 2 million people in the space of 3 years. The only way to do it is a series of nuclear bombs. The Israelis have tried. They've tried to massacre much more numbers of people than have died. But it's not easy. People fight back. The resistance in Gaza continues to fight back. That's why the Israelis can't occupy it fully. They continue to fight back. You can keep bombing Iran, but somewhere in Iran, which is a massive country, somebody is going to drive a truck out of a hole and fire a ballistic missile at you. And if it has multiple warheads, one of them is going to land in a building somewhere and people are getting hurt.
Yeah.
People are going to fight back. The Taliban continued to do that in Afghanistan. The Vietnamese did that in Vietnam. National liberation struggles have shown us people do not surrender.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. So Israel can never get security. It will have to come to some political understanding.
Yeah, as you expressed very perfectly well, within this era, the predominant narrative is that the Iranian military should fight back in the strongest manner possible. So, fight bring resistance, as you perfectly mentioned. And I also have another personal view, which is I don't believe that Israel has no plan to attack um, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, or other regional powers. Because for the simple fact that states tend to maximize their power and Israel wants to maximize its power. The only reason that within this time they hinder from such ambition is that they are preoccupied with Gaza, preoccupied with Lebanon, and of course Iran. So they are not, they don't have the strategic asset to start an attack against other regional power, but it is in their overarching ambition, I would say, which is the big Israel, the new Middle East. It is in their vision. Let's also talk about the very sophisticated and complex US-Israel strategic alliance. How should we understand the relationship between these two countries, between the US strategic interests and Israeli regional policies? Is this alliance best understood as a patron-client hierarchy, or a shared imperial project, or a geographical convergence?
This is a debate that's been going on since 1967. Okay, nobody has an answer to this. It's the debate of, does the dog wag its tail or does the tail wag
Yeah.
the dog? Yeah, it's a very old debate. In my opinion, many of these things are true at different times. There's no one answer to this. At certain points, Israel is in a dominant position for various political reasons within the United States, and defines policy. Other times, the United States defines policy, and so on. I think, in fact, that Israel and the United States have a shared project. I don't think it's that different. I think the complexity now is that there's a section of the American right wing, and the person involved here is Tucker Carlson, has broken from the consensus and is trying to find its way, to supporting Israel, but not supporting Israel telling the US what to do. You'll notice Tucker Carlson is completely pro-Israeli, but he doesn't want the Israelis to tell the United States what to do, which is a really silly political place to be in, because it's not that Israel tells the US to do anything. They have a shared political project. To seek the subordination of Iran is not an Israeli project that they've dragged the US into. That is also a US
Mm.
project. The US also wants to subordinate Iran. The US wants to subordinate Venezuela, Cuba. Israel is not interested in subordinating Venezuela or Cuba or
Yeah.
even China. That's a US project. It just happens that in West Asia, the US and Israeli project have collided. And so they operate together on many of their agenda points. But in fact, Israel is a minor player in the world. It's a major player in
Yeah.
West Asia and in North Africa, but it's a minor player. If I asked you, what's the position of Israel vis-a-vis South America? It's not, they don't have any
Yeah.
position really. Theirs is a super parochial worldview. They are looking at subordinating what they think of as the threats to Israel. Yeah, or those who are not just a threat to Israel, because Iran is not a threat to Israel. Iran is not a threat to Israel. It's important to say that. Iran is absolutely behind the project of Palestinian emancipation. That's different. If Israel wants to see that as a threat to itself, That's Israel's problem. I mean, it's Israel's problem that it is occupying Palestinian land. But I actually think Iran, from an Iranian perspective, is seeking the emancipation of the Palestinians. From Israel's perspective, that's a threat to Israel. So, in that sense, Israel has a parochial view of the world, a small view of the world. United States wants to smash Iran because it's basically disobedient to US power. So, in the case of Iran, the US and Israel combine. But in many cases, United States and Israel don't combine. They don't have a completely equivalent understanding. For instance, it's my view that when it comes to US policy on the Gulf Arab states, they have a disagreement. They don't agree entirely. I mean, the Israelis, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu, has a closer relationship to the Qataris than he does to the Saudis, and he has utilized the Qataris to finance Hamas. This is a very interesting thing that he has been doing for years, which the US may not have actually appreciated that because they have a whole different view of the Gulf Arab states, with Saudi Arabia as the leading state and so on. So I think it just depends on the context, that we shouldn't be too rigid in our interpretation. But in fact, I would say that in many cases their interests
Mm.
collide as far as they see
Exactly.
things.
And I think it also really depends on which president we are talking about. So Donald Trump is very different in comparison to Barack Obama. Their policies, their ambition, their objectives, and their links, personal links to their Israeli friends. So we know for a fact that Donald Trump is very connected to the Israeli lobby, and Barack Obama is less connected. So these also really reflect on the United States main policies. And I'm really delighted that we reached to this point. From now on, I want to have a focus on the epistemic authority and the narrative power. To what extent is contemporary imperial power sustained not only through military or economic means, but through control over institutions of knowledge? Think tanks, media networks, financial organizations, and also academic discourse.
Yeah, can you say that again, because you cut out a
Okay,
little
so I
bit?
repeat again. To what extent is the contemporary imperial power sustained not only through military or economic means, but through the control over institutions of knowledge?
Oh, I mean, this is absolutely important, fundamental, in fact, because as I mentioned, if we're going to do something called Washington missiles, one whole section is going to be on the attempt to erode confidence of a people in their country, in their world, and one way to do that, for instance, is to talk about corruption in the country, which systematically erodes confidence in your political elites. Even if there is corruption, corruption by itself isn't the sole explanation for why there are problems in a country. There's a lot of explanations, but you have a set of keywords applying, corruption, Gen Z, and so on. And these words describe, a constellation of ideas. This is the battle of ideas. You say there's the old elites are corrupt. We need new leadership. We need the youth. We need the Gen Z, etc., etc. It creates a worldview where you want to turn away from the past and look to the future, and you want to elect a rapper, whether it's Bobby Wine in Uganda, or it's Balan Shah in Nepal. However right wing their ideas, it doesn't matter. They're young, they're rappers, they are cool. They're not the old corrupt people. They come without a history, and oh, without a history is better than with a history, and etc. For that, you need a whole set of think tanks and media outlets and so on to create this compression, this cultural compression, where you feel suffocated by the culture you're living in and you want release, and then you get release from these amazing young people who are going to liberate you, and then look
And
what
of
happens.
course, drawing from the neo-Gramscian approaches to international political economy, uh, how we should understand the relationship between the material dominance and the consent in sustaining the global hegemony. Is there a very interconnected link here?
Well, look, if you're a country where everybody is satisfied and your basic needs are taken care of and the government is very much loved and so on and so forth, then there is no opportunity for any intervention into, the cultural domain, where somebody can say the leaders are corrupt, that's why you are hungry and so on. So, of course, there's a link, which is why the perfect combination is to sanction a country, deny it dollars, create economic problems, and as it develops economic problems, emerge with an explanation for the problems. The explanation isn't the sanctions, the explanation is the corruption, it's the old leadership, the gerontocratic leadership, it's the need for Gen Z, it's the need to have new voices, and etc., etc., privatize things, don't have the old dusty state run things, and so on. So the combination of the material and the ideological is absolutely fundamental. I mean, again, if everything is going great, take the case of China, where the standard of living is risen, poverty is gone, public transportation is wonderful. It's very difficult for the United States government to create a Gorbachev. Very difficult, very hard to find somebody to overthrow the system. If it's working, and you can sanction China as much as you want, but it's so big. Yeah. Even Iran withstood the sanctions because there's 100 million people. Yeah. There's an enormous internal market. But of course, it's very difficult when you're getting bombed, and that creates its own problems, infrastructure, bridges, this, that, and the other, which is why I understand point one of the negotiation from the Iranian
Hmm.
side is reparations.